Hi, I'm Jim Hightower, and I'm hoping that you will tune in to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour because it will turn you radioactive.
Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. My name is Steve Scrovan, along with my co-host David Feldman. Hello, David.
Hello, Steve.
Hannah is out today, but we do have the man of the hour, Ralph Nader. Hello, Ralph.
Hello, everybody.
For the past few weeks, regular listeners know we have been on the tax beat. While the culture wars rage in various forms, whether it's Trump going after higher education or deporting asylum seekers, unless, of course, you're a white South African. While all that is going on, this administration and the Republicans in Congress are trying to pick your pocket. A so-called big, beautiful bill that does just that sends billions of dollars upward to corporations and the wealthiest Americans, and throws a tiny bone to the working class in the form of things like no tax on tips. This bill just passed the House and has moved into the Senate. And to break that all down for us, we've invited Heidi Shierholtz, the president of the Economic Policy Institute. Ms. Shierholtz just put out a statement condemning the passage of this bill in the House. She points out that it will, despite Trump's promises, cut Medicaid, cut food stamps for the poorest, and also put millions of kids at risk of poverty by excluding their families from the child tax credit. In the second half of the program, we're going to talk car insurance as we welcome back J. Robert Hunter, the Director Emeritus of Insurance at the Consumer Federation of America. While many live paycheck to paycheck, insurance executives are living large by raising your auto insurance rates. So stick around for some practical advice about how you can save money. As always, somewhere in the middle, we'll check in with our ever-diligent corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber. But first, let's hear about a big, beautiful betrayal. David?
Heidi Shierholz is the president of the Economic Policy Institute, a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank that uses the power of its research on economic trends and on the impact of economic policies to advance reforms that serve working people, deliver racial justice, and guarantee gender equity. In 2021, she became the fourth president of EPI since its founding in 1986. Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Heidi Sherholtz.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Welcome indeed, Heidi. And for our listeners, it's very important for the American people to clue in on this bill. It passed the House of Representatives by one vote, just one vote. And it was full of turmoil even inside the Republican parties. They're fighting over this and that. And now it goes to the Senate where it's going to face much more difficulty and either be rewritten significantly or blocked by some Democratic strategies that are being cooked up now, as well as maybe some detours by a few Republicans who may join in opposing it. But first, we got to know what's in it. It's been called the greatest transfer of wealth from the mass of the American people to the top super rich and giant corporations. So, Heidi, you've gone through this monstrous bill, and let's start with the tax provisions. Explain what it does to the already complicated, porous Swiss cheese tax code.
Yep. Okay. I am happy to. And I will start also by saying, your point that it is the largest upward redistribution we've ever seen in a bill like this is absolutely true. We've never seen a budget that so plainly takes from the poor to give to the rich. And I wish I could give attribution for this, but I saw on some social media feed as I was scrolling yesterday a political cartoon that summed it up better than anything I've seen. It showed two people standing on a yacht, and one was saying, and it was referring to the yacht, and can you believe it only cost 800 people their Medicaid benefits? Like, that is at the core what this is. It just savages the safety net. It literally takes food from kids, healthcare from the poor, adds trillions to the debt, all to provide tax breaks that go overwhelmingly to the rich. There's no historical precedent for this. So if we digging in on the tax components of this, the Congressional Budget Office, nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, found that lower and lower middle income people will actually lose out. They may get something of a tax break, but they lose benefits so that on net, their after tax income will be lower after this bill. while the rich just make out like bandits. So the number that again, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office put on this was that the top 0.1% of Americans would take home at least $389,000 extra in after-tax income next year. It's just an unbelievable shift of income in this country from lower income people to higher income people. And it happens in a bunch of different ways. That's sort of the cumulative impact of the bill. But one way that is very salient, I think, is there's talk out there about estate caps. Like, how much can you give to your kids without having them have to pay taxes on it when you die? This bill has an estate cap that is roughly 15 million for a single person and 30 million for couples. So what that means is that a couple could leave 29.99 million to their heirs without paying a single cent of estate. And that's just emblematic of the kinds of tax changes in this bill. Like, it technically applies to everyone, right? But only the very wealthy have enough money that they would have had to pay that tax. So it's just incredibly skewed. It's going to substantially increase inequality.
Well, inequality is just a smooth phrase for exploitation and cruel impact on people's livelihoods. Let's talk about how the Trumpsters and the GOP in Congress are going to pay for this huge tax cut. First of all, over 10 years, how much is this tax cut going to pile up in dollars? And then go through all the cuts and necessary programs for everyday people. It's pretty staggering, listeners, that is going to be forced to pay for this, plus a greater deficit for the children and grandchildren to have to be burdened by. Go ahead.
Yep. Okay, so we have this massive tax cut that will go overwhelmingly to the rich. Here is how it's paid for. Two streams. One, cutting benefits to the poor. And I will go through what those means. It feels just cruel by design. It is the kinds of cuts we're seeing are sort of unthinkable. And then the other thing is not paid for at all. Just, the draconian cuts that we are seeing to the safety net are not big enough because the tax increases are so huge that this bill also increases the deficit dramatically. So the number that you hear out there is it'll increase the deficit by $3+ trillion over the next 10 years. That is enormous. It is incredibly large, but even that incredibly large number is being held down by an accounting trick that the Republicans in Congress are using. They'll just say, oh, well, we plan on having many of these provisions expire in 10 years. And so they don't count the cost of these things in the out years. If you appropriately do the accounting and don't do that cheap accounting trick that they did, the increase of this bill, the amount this bill will increase the debt is on the order of $5 trillion over the next 10 years.
When you're talking about the poor, I don't want that word to mislead our listeners. It's not just the poor that are paying. It's like 98% of the American people. If they don't get shafted with the tax loopholes to the rich, they get denied all kinds of programs. For example, Meals on Wheels, Head Start, Medicaid cuts. There are 71 million people relying on Medicaid. There's severe cuts in Medicaid. There are massive cuts in law enforcement to save people money from corporate fraud and corporate crime, like virtually shutting down the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. He is basically, as a president, this is not in the bill, but he has gotten rid of over 100 criminal prosecutions of corporations, just told the Justice Department to get rid of them. The latest one exonerating a guilty plea by the Boeing Corporation and its crashes in Indonesia and Ethiopia. So food stamps, the SNAP program, that is being severely cut. So it isn't just the poor, right? This affects AmeriCorps, may affect the poor. They're laying off thousands of people there. The Veterans Administration, tens of thousands are either being fired or their jobs are very much up in the air. There's huge anguish and tension and damage to morale in the Veterans Administration. There isn't any program benefiting the American people that Trump is not cutting in order to turn the country over to the giant corporations and the super rich. It's basically an overthrow of the government and an overthrow of the rule of law. Trump has basically said he can do whatever he wants as president, and he has never, since he became president again, said, I can't do this because it's against the law. You can't discern any respect for the law by this fascist dictator. So what I see, Heidi, is that groups like the Economic Policy Institute are having great trouble catching up with the urgency of a fascist dictatorship with a sycophant Republican control of the Congress and very iffy signals from the Supreme Court. So give me your view on what needs to be done in the coming weeks in Congress.
So I agree with what you said that this will touch negatively a whole swath of people. The most draconian cuts, though, really are for the poorest people. So, like, it will take health insurance away from an estimated 15 million people. Many will forego treatment, like not taking medication they need. Thousands more will die. Like, many folks are calling this sort of MAGA murder bill. They're not wrong. People will die because of the cuts that we're seeing here. It imposes a ton of new work reporting requirements to get benefits like Medicaid and SNAP. Maybe on the surface, that doesn't sound terrible, but it is terrible policy. The research is absolutely crystal clear that more stringent work requirements do not boost work in a significant way because they don't actually attack the core problems of weak economic conditions or irregular, unpredictable scheduling practices of low-wage jobs. Like, those requirements just increase administrative burdens for adults seeking needed benefits. And what that means is they are designed to push people off Medicaid.
Your point about people dying, getting hurt or sick, listen to this, listeners. Trump is crippling the budget for occupational health and safety, workplace. 60,000 people die every year due to workplace-related diseases. Many are sickened. He is defunding a great deal of the control of air and water pollution, drinking water contamination, cutting the EPA budget severely. In terms of tornadoes and hurricanes, droughts and wildfires, what is Trump and the Republicans doing? Well, in the process of shutting down FEMA, saying, hey, states, you handle it. Hey, California, hey, Texas, hey, Florida, you handle it. Well, they can't handle it. They don't have the resources to handle it, not to mention the experience of FEMA. And so people are going to lose their lives, lose their homes, lose their businesses, wildfires, droughts, floods, sea level increase, as well as unprecedentedly severe hurricanes and tornadoes. And it comes to disease protection, they're cutting the budgets of the Centers for Disease Control and National Institutes of Health. These are the first responders. These are not just the research about various diseases and epidemics and pandemics, but they develop strategies to be ready, readiness, preparedness, or when they do happen, how do you mitigate them? So he's leaving the American people defenseless. I think when people look back on Trump, if he finishes 4 years, and I hope he's impeached and removed, or such a huge demand by people, including businesses who are getting harmed here, not just small businesses, there's economic stability on the horizon. But I think they're going to look at it as the Dark Ages, just like when we were in high school and studied the medieval Dark Ages. These are going to be the Dark Ages. I'm running through this, Heidi, because there's no end to how he is harming the people of this country while he's shielding corporate welfare, hundreds of billions of dollars, subsidies, giveaways, tax loopholes. He and Musk are not touching the military budget. They want to add another $100 billion more than the generals have asked for. That's a real part of this bill that you have analyzed. And they're not doing anything about law enforcement against corporate crime on federal programs. Like the last estimate I saw, there's $60 billion a year fraud on Medicare alone. And then there's fraud on Medicaid. So you have here a corporate fascist state where if you're a corporation, you love it, unless you're a small business. If you're a corporation, you love it. And Trump has joined this greedy potpourri by enriching his own family and all the connections with currency. So we have a recipe for the most serious disaster in American history, bar the Civil War. So give me a bigger picture here of what's coming. I mean, we haven't even had 150 days yet. Give a picture of what's coming and what you think has to be done.
Yeah, that is a very good question. We put out at 100 days. So my organization, we really focus on an economy that works well for low and middle income workers. Like that's our core focus. And we put out a piece at the 100 days level, Trump's 100 days in office. And we came up with, we had actually cut some from the list, 100 ways Trump has hurt working people. Like it is just the left and right, the absolute flooding the zone assault on the wages, working conditions, right of working people in this country is just unbelievable. And I do not claim to have the answer on how to reverse this. One of the things on this bill is this kind of radio show, like getting the word out on just what's truly in there. Like you talk about what's going on with climate change. This bill expands handouts to fossil fuel polluters and eviscerates the clean energy transition. It provides instant tax giveaways to pipeline companies, gas exporters, oil refiners. It slashes fines for companies who are discharging methane gas into the atmosphere. It lets fossil fuel companies pay less for drilling for oil and gas on public land, just like on and on and on. It ends or restricts clean energy tax credits for electric cars, home efficiency improvements. It is just the attack on the clean energy transition is mind-boggling. You talked about the increase in funding for the Pentagon. The Pentagon's budget will be over $1 trillion under this bill for the first time. And they're trying to get all the increases to the Pentagon to happen in the first year instead of over 10 years, which will mean like it sort of creates space for the Pentagon to come back for more bites in the apple in later years. And the anti-immigrant stuff in this bill is just unconscionable. It is absolutely cruel. And like along the lines of law enforcement, it dramatically expands the detention and jailing of immigrants, including kids. So there's 150 billion in this bill for immigration enforcement, including 45 billion for immigration jails, which will be used to jail adults and kids.
They're largely going to be private corporate jails. The immigration part of what you just said, Heidi, is the first manifestation of the police state. First, you have Trump, you have autocracy, then you have fascist dictator, then it moves to a police state, and then terror follows that. He's defunding the corporate crime police. He's firing the federal cops on the corporate crime beat. That means pollution, fraud on the taxpayer-funded programs. That means destabilizing the people who obey the law. The crooks push out the honest people, sort of a Gresham's law here. And he was already fired the inspector generals. He's fired all the units or is on the process of ridding the units that monitor his executive branch to try to hold them accountable and say, hey, stop, you're violating the law. So he's developing immunity from the law for his entire Trumpster musketeer regime. So it is amazing when you read the papers, Heidi, they don't come close to the kind of descriptions that our listeners have just heard. It's like they're out of date. You know, they're talking about equity for poor people. The guy's overthrowing America, period. He's turned it over to the corporations and his family businesses as part of it. It's like a banana republic on steroids, what's happening. Now, you have demonstrations, you have more and more marches, more and more picketing, but it's not enough. The Democrats, with your encouragement, should have shadow hearings for every committee. They should have committee rooms assigned. They can do that, even though they're in the minority. They can have witnesses like you and others from around the country. They can have the press, and they can start building pressure, because the only institution left in the country that can stop this marauding fascist dictator, this daily liar, this self-enricher, this violent speaker, this foul-mouthed ignoramus on things that our country needs in terms of necessities and preparedness domestically. The only institution left is the Congress. And people say, oh, it's controlled by the Republicans. Now, when the polls drop, the economy starts tanking, the stock market starts sinking, unemployment increases, prices increase. The Republican Party in Congress will abandon Trump because he's not running again, and they have to run again, and they'd be facing a disaster in 2026. So what are your views on shadow hearings? There are already 4 of them.
I think it's very important, and it is one lane, right? Like the way people get their information now makes it hard. So we have to, I'm not saying anything all of you don't already know. So we just have to hit this in so many different ways. And shadow hearings are a really, really important way to do it. And one of the things that is actually useful, I mean, I put that in big quotes, but about this horrible, amoral, unconscionable bill is that there is so much bad in it. If you can, talk to people, have people understand what's in there, it's easier to get people to see the kinds of things that you're talking about. Like just a kind of a toss-off provision in this bill is a moratorium on any state laws governing the use of artificial intelligence for the next 10 years. Like with technology that is changing as fast as AI is changing, the idea that we wouldn't allow states to regulate, it just could not be a bigger giveaway to big tech. It makes us less safe, like all the things that you're talking about. Those kinds of just really blatant provisions are kind of shot through this entire bill. Talking about this bill is a useful tool for helping people understand truly where this administration is on direct opposition to the rhetoric they use, the pro-worker rhetoric that Trump used on the campaign trail, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, let's talk practical strategy here. The Congress Watch, the Public Citizen, and the Patriotic Millionaires are trying to get shadow hearings, the House Ways and Means Committee, the Tax Writing Committee, and its counterpart in the Senate Finance Committee. And this would get a lot of publicity because you could publicize what's in the deadly guts of this giant bill quite quickly. Can have the witnesses and the hearings and the television coverage and so on. Are you part of that effort, Economic Policy Institute?
Yes, we are working in coalition with many groups on, including Patriotic Millionaires, including Institute for Policy Studies. I know that you had a person from there on recently, in everything we can do to get the word out. And right now it really is focused around this bill because it's so blatant. It is so clear who this administration is really working for. And it is not the American people, right? Like it is a thin slice of kind of robber barons at the top. And this bill makes it really clear. So I am not saying that there's not things that we could be doing better. I'm sure there is, but there's definitely broad coalitions working to get this word out, including through things like shadow hearings.
Well, it's also a matter of the arcane rules of the Senate. Now, under the so-called reconciliation process, the Republicans can try to get this bill through and avoid a filibuster by the Democrats because they could never get 60 votes on this. However, there's a school of thought that there are parts of the bill that the Senate parliamentarian cannot allow to go through on a simple majority vote under reconciliation. Are you on top of the Byrd rule, as it's called, after Senator Robert Byrd from West Virginia, which gives you an opportunity to wedge some of these provisions outside reconciliation, and they can be defeated by a filibuster?
Yep. And that does point to there are obstacles in the way of this bill getting passed in its current form. Like you said, it just passed the House. Now it's headed to the Senate, and there things are stricter because of exactly what you said, the Byrd rule. So things like that artificial intelligence policy that I just talked about, that might not make it through what people call the Byrd bath, the pun on the Byrd rule, because they might say this isn't appropriate in this setting. But some of the parliamentarian decisions, it's a person making these decisions. There is sort of random chance in there, so we don't know what all will make it through. But it is I'm absolutely sure that the Senate is not going to pass the exact, not going to end up with the exact bill that the House just passed. And so there is going to have to be negotiations. And given how hard it was to get this bill passed in the House, because they have a few people who are a little bit concerned about massive cuts to Medicaid, massive cuts to food assistance, particularly governors of and lawmakers from red states, particularly in the South, who actually benefit a lot. Their people benefit a lot from those programs. So there's some people who don't want as draconian of cuts. And then there's others from the Freedom Caucus who want more draconian cuts. And so there is this bit of push and pull. So there are some obstacles in the way of this bill actually becoming law, but I'm not really holding too many illusions. I believe the bill that finally will pass will be.
Well, you can't have that attitude. Heidi, listen, I'm an expert in monitoring defeatism by progressive groups in Washington.
Fair enough, yes.
Okay. First of all, if this bill was polled, 85% of the American people would oppose it.
That's
if
right.
they knew the contents.
That's right.
And some of the provisions, like taking the federal cops off the corporate crime beat and cutting taxes for the super rich, those things, you got 85, 90% of the people. That's a lot of conservatives as well as liberals. Number two, there's a growing rebellion in the business community in the South because Trump and the GOP are getting rid of a lot of massive programs appropriated under the Biden administration. For example, there's about $500 billion, most of it going to the South for renewable energy projects. They've got projects underway. They got factories underway. They got solar systems underway. And suddenly the money's being pulled. They don't like that. You think they're going to say, oh, I voted for Trump, so I'm going to deep six my business practices? So there's a lot of roiling that can be maneuvered all over the country, including Trump voters. You know, I'm hearing from Trump voters who are, getting veteran benefits, and they say, we didn't vote for this when we voted for Trump. You've got millions of older people benefiting from Meals on Wheels. That is a major welfare program. It's not just a plate once a week. And those involve Trump voters. Trump voters, a lot of them are on Medicaid. We didn't vote for that. So the idea is to delay. That's the first strategy, is delay, because what the GOP and the Senate want to do is get this through quick, before the public is alerted and said,
Yes.
hey,
Right.
hey, enough is enough. They want to get it through before the 4th of July. So one approach by groups like yours is delay. The second is shadow hearings. It doesn't matter how many of the progressive groups are shouting alerts. You have to have a laser beam inside the Congress. So you got to get together right away with other citizen groups and start getting shadow hearings in one committee after another, including the Rules Committee. So I'm trying to convey a sense of urgency here that I don't see in a lot of groups who you work with and I work with in Washington, D.C.
I appreciate that. And on the delay tactic, I feel like the deadline that I have heard is on their minds the most is the debt ceiling. We will hit the debt ceiling. And I don't know what the exact estimated date is right now, but I believe it's sometime in August is the sort of X date when we will hit the debt ceiling. This bill addresses that in a temporary way. And so they will really be trying to get this out before that happens. So if we can delay even beyond that point, the leverage becomes even greater to make substantial changes in the positive direction on this behemoth. So I think that delay tactic and the shadow hearings make a ton of sense. And the other thing that I will say is your point that the business community that Trump is losing some of them. This bill, if it passes in anything close to its current form, is going to be terrible for the economy. It will bring the national debt to a record high as a share of the overall economy, higher than it was during World War II. The increase in the debt is just remarkable, and that is bad for the economy. It will hurt regular people. It puts upward pressure on interest rates, so people will see the price of their auto loans, their mortgages, small business loans, all that stuff will rise. And so it's just, we're going to see more debt, higher borrowing costs, inflation, slower growth. Like all of those things are going to be real outcomes of this bill and other Trump economic policies, which we can see is starting to really spook the investors and other sort of business folks.
You're right to focus on the debt ceiling because Senator Rand Paul has said that if this bill includes increasing the debt ceiling, the amount the U.S. government can borrow, he'll vote against the bill. So that's one switch right there. And it will probably give an excuse for the senator from Alaska, Murkowski, senator from Maine, Collins, and one or two others. And that's a way to slow down the bill because, as you say, if they're going to try to get it through before the deadline for raising the debt ceiling. And so, do you have much confidence in Senator Schumer's leadership that he can develop the process of delay? The Senate is supposed to be a wonderful place to delay things. Are you in touch with his people to see what the strategies and tactics are? They don't even have the right language. First of all, they should accuse Trump of defunding the police. You'll say, what do you mean? Yeah, you're defunding the corporate crime police, which causes far more death, injury, disease, and economic theft than a street crime by factors. And then you accuse him of hating veterans. Why? You know, he's a draft dodger. And he once said that the soldiers who died and buried in France were losers and suckers. Those are the words he used. So you get the veterans, you see, you start throwing language that people understand. Mr. Trump, you have all these programs you're cutting to help the vast majority of the American people, their necessities, health, safety, economic needs. Why do you hate so many Americans? Why are you so full of hate for Americans? But you love corporations. The bigger they are, the more you give them tax breaks, subsidies, guarantees, allow them to be crooked, escape taxes. Why do you hate so many Americans, President Trump? Instead of this economic jargon that the Washington Post wrote about very recently, the Democrats are all tied up in economic jargon. They talk about economically disadvantaged people instead of the poor. They talk about economically disadvantaged people. They have all kinds of jargon that don't resonate the way Trump's plain language resonates. Your comments?
Yeah, I hear that very, very loud and clear. So one thing, I can't remember where I heard this, but somebody said you shouldn't lead with your policy. You lead with the vision that you want for the country. You should be able to have a job where you can get home in time to see your kid. Just talk about what it is instead of leading with the policy. Trump does the opposite, right? Like he can use that plain language. He has used that plain language successfully to connect with people, while his policies, in actual fact, are profoundly undermining their wages, their working conditions, their way of life. And so I think it is really important that Democrats or people who are opposed to Trump and Trump's sort of neo-fascist approach to governing to really not whitewash, you not use the language to whitewash things and instead really say what's going on. I think that's really, really, really important. Another thing that I'm interested, if you think that this is resonant with folks, is I think it is, because I think people really, really do think highly of public education in this country. It is one of the most important institutions we have. And Trump, there's a very clear, broader effort to replace public education with private schools. And like hidden in this bill is provisions that will funnel public dollars to private education. It creates $5 billion private school voucher program that will allow the wealthy to claim tax breaks for their donations to organizations that give out private school vouchers. And the tax breaks are dollar for dollar. So they're incredibly generous. It's like 3 times as generous as what you'd get from like donating to a children's hospital or donating to a veterans group or anywhere else. It's just the kinds of attacks on public education that we see in here. It's consistent with his broader attacks on education and on universities and everything. There are big hikes on on student loan payments in this bill. It's just, there is something to reach essentially everyone in this bill. So your point about we need to use very clear language to say what's going on, I think is really, really, I'm with you, and I'm going to come away from this interview inspired to do that in a stronger way.
We're talking with Heidi Shierholtz, is the president of the Economic Policy Institute, very fine organization in Washington with a record of compassion and accuracy and precise economic studies. But I know you want to talk a little about connecting the mania on tariffs and how it connects to this bill. Talk about how the tariffs, his gyrations on the tariffs, which get the stock market to go up one day and then drop the next day, allowing all kinds of insider trading opportunities for the Trumpsters and their cronies. Talk about the tariffs, because your organization has done a lot of work on this.
Yep. When I talk about these tariffs, I always do want to start by saying tariffs aren't inherently bad. Tariffs can be a very important tool in a broader toolkit to support a strategic domestic industry, as long as it's used in a narrow strategic way as part of a broader coherent plan. It should never be the centerpiece of anyone's economic policy. So Trump is like, with his completely chaotic, very large across the board tariffs, it's just plain idiotic. It is absolutely idiotic policy. And because of the way he's doing it, it is going to slow growth and increase inflation. And so when you have the trade war that is slowing growth, increasing prices, combined with a budget, which if it goes through as it is now, will massively increase the debt, massively raise borrowing costs. What you have is, Trump inherited this extremely strong macroeconomy, and I will never be the person that says the economy that Biden handed off was perfect. It was far from perfect, but it macroeconomic wise was strong. The unemployment rate had been at 4.2% or lower for 39 months. I think that's the right number, but it was the longest stretch that we'd seen since 1965. It was an extremely strong economy, and Trump is on the verge of squandering that. And that is really, really going to hurt people. So this combination of what's happening with this budget and Trump's other policies, in particular his trade war, is just an absolutely toxic combination.
The other thing is, if you listen to his speeches, especially the most recent one, he was giving a speech to the graduation class at West Point. He paints a picture of a wonderful economy. Everything is going great. Workers are never before. He paints a picture of fantasy. So he's unable to have a manifestation of leadership, has a grip on reality. So tell our listeners how they can get that report, 100 Ways That Workers Are Being Harmed.
So it is on EPI's website. So that's epi.org, and it's called 100 Days, 100 Ways. So if you just go to epi.org and search 100, I bet it will be the first thing that comes up.
And it's a great website, listeners, on many other things that affect your livelihood and your hopes for a better America. EPI.org. Remember that. And get the material that Heidi just mentioned. The hardest working people in America are poor people.
Yep.
Underpaid people who harvest our crops under terrible conditions, who take care of our elderly, who are a nanny for our kids, who clean up buildings and other places in dangerous areas after us.
Another thing that's in this bill that Trump has been using to say, oh no, this is going to help working people. Those are the two big gimmicks that are in there: the no tax on overtime and no tax on tips. Those are both in there. The no tax on Social Security benefits did not make it in, but the no tax on tips, no tax on overtime pay are both in there. And they are terrible policy. They will help some workers, but they will actually hurt more workers than they help. So not like just if you just take overtime, but the same arguments go for tips. Actually, not all that many people get overtime pay. But what this will mean is that employers will game this system. So they'll have somebody who makes, whatever, $100,000 in salary, and they'll say, I'm going to make you hourly, and I'll make it so you come out the same or maybe a little bit less, right? Because you'll accept a little bit less because you will get this big benefit of not having to pay taxes on your overtime. And so what that does is it puts downward pressure on base wages, and employers capture that difference, right? Like the employers of workers who get overtime, the employers of workers who get tips will actually receive sort of indirectly a big chunk of the benefits of, no tax on overtime, no tax on tips. And that is key. Like the Trump administration knows that. They know that these employers actually love this stuff. If they really cared about the workers, they wouldn't be doing this ridiculous tax gimmick. They would say, we need you to boost overtime. We could work on legislation that doesn't have overtime be paid at time and a half. It's paid at 1.75 or 2 times, or raise the overtime salary threshold, or raise the tip minimum wage. Like all of these other kinds of things that would directly get money to these workers are the way to do it, rather than these tax gimmicks that actually will hurt more workers than they help. But he's certainly getting a lot of mileage out of it. So that's an important thing that we all have to kind of push.
Very
back
important. The no tax on tips and no tax on overtime are full of trap doors that boomerang
Totally.
against millions of Americans, full of what's called unintended consequences. We've been talking with Heidi Shierholtz, the president of the esteemed Economic Policy Institute in Washington, D.C., and we hope that this conversation will galvanize you out there in the listening audience to do smart lobbying, not just marching without focusing on your 2 senators and representatives. It's all coming down to Congress, more and more, week after week. That's the only countervailing power, and there's only 535 men and women there, and they have we the people, sovereign power delegated to them, and you can start pulling it back, conditioning it, and giving a laser beam focus now to delay this bill, to have more shadow hearings, have more press coverage, and to make sure that this monster that's on the horizon never reaches the desk of tyrant Trump. Thank you very much, Heidi.
Thank you. It's really been my pleasure.
We've been speaking with Heidi Sherholtz. We will link to her work at the Economic Policy Institute at RalphNaderRadioHour.com. When we come back, we're going to talk about car insurance. But now let's check in with our corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber.
From the National Press Building in Washington, D.C., this is your Corporate Crime Report on Morning Minute for Friday, June 6, 2025. I'm Russell Mokhiber. As harms from corporate conduct are escalating, federal enforcement is in retreat. With the Supreme Court's turn to more extreme form of federalism, the burden of policing corporate conduct will increasingly fall to the states. But for states to succeed in curbing corporate harms, they will need more effective remedies. In a recent law review article titled A Charter for Justice, Corporate Enforcement for the New Federalism, Donald Brayman and Teresa Gabaldon of the GW Law School propose a novel approach, restructuring corporations that engage in criminal conduct into public benefit subsidiaries chartered at the state level. They argue that this remedy will allow states to directly address the harms of culpable corporate conduct without destroying the value corporations create for states and their residents. For the Corporate Crime Reporter, I'm Russell Mokhiber.
Thank you, Russell. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. I'm Steve Scrovan, along with David Feldman and Ralph. Are your auto insurance rates going up? Our next guest has some ideas about what to do about that. David?
Robert Hunter is the Director Emeritus of Insurance at the Consumer Federation of America. He's held many positions in the field, both public and private, including being the Commissioner of Insurance for the state of Texas, being the president and founder of the National Insurance Consumer Organization, and he served as United States Federal Insurance Administrator. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Robert Hunter.
Thank you.
And welcome back, Robert Hunter, who also is a very experienced property casualty actuary. So he knows what he's talking about. Let's start with what people are screaming about all over the country, surging auto insurance premiums. They can't believe what's coming at them in terms of the bills. What's causing it?
Well, it's a combination of things that are kind of a perfect storm for rising rates. Part of it is needed in certain states. I mean, when you see a hurricane or when you see, like in California, wildfires, it's not just houses that get burnt down or blown away. It's autos too. And that is costly. I mean, when you have a big flood after a hurricane, you're talking about thousands of cars that may be flooded. But, some people can drive them away, but some people can't. Sometimes the storm comes in at a different angle or something and people aren't ready. So part of it is understandable. Part of it is also the insurers are very good at being opportunistic in the wake of these storms and so on. As you know, Ralph, the best insurance regulation in the country is in California, but California's had these wildfires. As a result, home prices and auto prices have skyrocketed, and they're trying to skyrocket more. But also, the insurance companies are trying to get rid of Proposition 103, which taking advantage of the wildfires to say, we don't need any regulation, get that out of here. And that's happening in other states too, which is part of the problem, particularly if you're in a state where there's been hurricanes or tornadoes or, big hailstorms or fires. You're going to have the insurance companies using the opportunity to say to the insurance commissioner, I got to get another 20%. And good grief, look at that. Insurance commissioners are very nervous about saying no when companies seem to be saying, well, I may not stay here, or I may just not serve that part. So a lot of it is that. Unfortunately, most state insurance departments are pathetic at trying to stop rates, don't have actuaries, don't really care, some places don't even look at the filings. And so the insurance companies can do what they want. And in places that try a little bit, they have that pressure now they can put on them because they're scared. The rates have gone up about 20% a year. You're talking a significant whack. So I understand the stress that people are under.
Well, one aspect of every state insurance law taught us is this phrase that the rates have to be fair and reasonable. And when the traffic declined in the early months of the COVID-19 epidemic, there were some rebates, actual checks sent back to millions of policyholders because there were fewer crashes due to less traffic. And some insurance commissioners have said to impose a fair and reasonable standard, you got to give your customers a rebate. But then it stopped in most states. And talk about how many billions of dollars are still owed by way of rebates to auto insurance policyholders around the country, and how people can find out the situation in their own state with a good website that you put together.
Yeah, we were the ones that first thought of, gee, I'm looking at the middle of New York City and there's no cars. One night I woke up in the middle of the night and I had an idea that we're going to ask for rebates. And by the end of the day, we had filed letters in every state, and we had filed a press release. Nobody paid much attention because it was new and people were dying and people were scared. So the press didn't cover it. So we issued the exact same press week a week later, and it was huge. So the timing is always important. And within a week, insurance companies started to file. Nobody made them, but they started to file rebates. The big one, I think the first one was Geico. And they filed some sizable rebates, which amounted to about $15 billion, which was good because it was a start. But the driving didn't return immediately. It took, a couple of years before it was back to normal. And we calculated that they still owed about $35 billion.
$35 billion as of now?
Yeah, because they never paid it back. And the insurance commissioners basically ignored our pleadings. There was only one or two states, Jersey and California, that looked at it properly and tried to collect more money later. So it's still roughly $35 billion.
Bob Hunter, when you say we, you're talking about
Consumer Federation.
Consumer Federation of America. So how can people find out the situation in rebates and no rebates in their state?
Yeah, I believe that Consumer Federation website would have something. I haven't looked lately. We did have a chart. We certainly have the calculations, and so we could make that available, or they could. I'm not there anymore, but I'm an emeritus. I can sort of act like I'm old and give them some instructions. So I'll try to get that. That's a good idea. Make sure it's up.
One thing you've written about over the years and testified about is how people can learn how to buy auto insurance in a smarter way and actually save money. Give us some tips here.
Yeah, well, it's harder right now because a lot of companies are restricting their intake, but it's always shopping. I mean, it's always shopping, and do it yourself. Decide how much you need. Don't ask for more than you really need. And then once you have I need this much for my car, I need this much for if I hit somebody, and so on. And then you get that statistic and you send it out to several companies and get quotes. I think it's very important. And you have to, here are some things that you may not know about that you have to watch out for. There's something called price optimization that we actually got 20 states to ban, but there are still, the rest of the states haven't banned it. And that means some companies will charge you more if they think you'll pay more. even though the law in each state says the rates should be based upon the risk being insured, not on whether or not people are smart shoppers. So it's important to get quotes. And then there's rating factors that different companies have different rating factors. Rating factors are very unfair to poor people. If you rent a house rather than own a house, auto insurance rates are higher for the renter. If you're single, you're higher than a single woman, you're higher than if you're a married woman. If you have more education, you pay less. If you used to insure yourself with a high risk company, they'll charge you more because you're used to insure it. If you took low limits before, only maybe the state required, they'll charge you more. Anything that makes you look like you're poor, they'll charge you more. And so it's shopping around, because some companies don't do that as much. State Farm is bad on one area, for example, and they charge you for credit score, which is another one that hurts poor people. And State Farm makes a big deal out of that one, but they're pretty good on the other ones. They don't have all those other ones. But most companies have some different combination. So shopping around will knock out, you'll see lower prices from companies that don't use all those factors.
Do you have any companies that are consistently good that you'd recommend?
USAA, you have to have some connection to the military to get auto insurance from them, but it's still a huge company because my father was in the service in World War I, and I can get coverage. And so it's a pretty broad group that can get it. If you qualify in any way, you should at least try it. And then you got Erie Insurance Company, Amica Mutual. They're the best. And those three. And yeah, they always come in low with price. And if you have a claim, you're going to be okay with those companies.
What do you think of Progressive Insurance advertising comparative rates between themselves and their major competitors?
Well, I think that's a good idea for them. They have a pretty low price, and I think they would be smart to do that.
Let's go to Steve.
Bob, talk about the relationship between auto insurance rates rising and executive compensation rising.
Oh, yeah. Over the last 2 years, the top 10 executives of auto insurance companies got about $250 million of income. And so there's about a whole bunch of companies that make more than 10 million executives, but just the top 10 I'm talking about. So yeah, their income has raised significantly because they're making more money. It's a funny thing in the insurance industry. Let's say you have a big hurricane, and suddenly some of these offshore reinsurance companies are going to have to pay something. And so you look at their stock market the next day and you think, boy, it's going to be really down. It's always up because here's the opportunity. We can now charge whatever we want.
So the insurance rates are not necessarily related to how many people are making claims. It's more related to how their stock portfolio is doing. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, it's both. I mean, they have to cover the claims, obviously, but they usually ignore the investment incomes they're making, and they try not to put that in the rates. One of the first things I did when Ralph and I started NICO, and we even talked about it in our initial press conference, was I went after the problem of investment income in rate making. And finally we got the National Association of Insurance Commissioners to agree with us. And they issued a thing saying to insurance commissioners, you have to use investment income in rate making. And some of them did. California uses it in a very good way. And some of them didn't. And some of them have forgotten about it. And the insurers are not in a hurry to tell them. But yeah, that's a very important factor that needs to be factored into. Otherwise, they announce how much, we're losing a fortune. And then you look at their actual annual statement they send to shareholders and they're making a fortune. So, strange world.
Yeah, people find it hard to figure out when the insurance companies are crying red ink and they're losing money. I don't think they've lost money since records started in the early 1920s. The way they cry poor is they say, well, we're paying out more this last year than the premiums we got. Yeah, but you got all kinds of interest payments and capital gains from your investments, which reflect your reserves. And the reserves are huge for these insurance companies.
Yeah, the investment income and it's your money in the reserves. It's the people's money because they're holding it like, the original insurance companies were, I think, done by the Phoenicians in their shipping. And they got together people who owned ships and said, look, we lose a ship and one of us goes broke, but let's share the burden. And they did that. And then later they started to charge an upfront charge instead of collecting after the accident. And then later they got somebody to do the balance sheets. Those guys that got to do the balance sheets are the insurance companies. And really, all that money that they have in their coffers is still yours. They've taken the money in, let's say, on January 1st from you. And on average, your claim will be in 8 months. And then it takes a year and a half to pay. So you got like 2 years almost of time value in money that they're claiming for themselves, even though it's your money sitting in their coffers. So that's why investment income is a very important factor. And that's why it was good to start with that, Ralph. That really helped us.
Yeah, for sure. We've been talking with Bob Hunter for many years, by far the leading consumer advocate in the country to protect insurance policyholders, especially in the auto insurance area. And you worked for many years under the aegis of the Consumer Federation of America. So a lot of your work is still online. You want to give the website?
Sure, it's consumerfed.org. Consumer, the word consumer, FED.org.
Thank you very much for your many decades of work, Rob, and your inspiring example and the model you set up.
It's all because of you, my dear friend. Thank you for calling me out.
Well, you're, as usual, excessively generous. Thank you very much, Robert.
We've been speaking with Robert Hunter. We will link to his work at the Consumer Federation of America at ralphnaderradiohour.com. I want to thank our guests again, Heidi Shierholtz and Robert Hunter. For those of you listening on the radio, that's our show. For you podcast listeners, stay tuned for some bonus material we call the Wrap-Up, featuring Francesco DeSantis with In Case You Haven't Heard. A transcript of this program will appear on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour Substack site soon after the episode is posted.
Subscribe to us on our Ralph Nader Radio Hour YouTube channel. And for Ralph's weekly column, it's at nader.org. For more from Russell Mokhiber, it's at corporatecrimereporter.com.
The American Museum of Tort Law has gone virtual. It's at tortmuseum.org. You can explore the exhibits, take a virtual tour, and learn about iconic tort cases from history.
To order your copy of the Capitol Hill Citizen, Democracy Dies in Broad Daylight, it's at capitolhillcitizen.com.
And remember to continue the conversation after each show. Go to the comments section at ralphnaderradiohour.com and post a comment or question on this week's episode.
The producers of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour are Jimmy Lee Wirt, Hannah Feldman, and Matthew Marin. Our executive producer, Alan Minsky.
Our theme music, Stand Up, Rise Up, was written and performed by Kemp Harris. Our proofreader is Elizabeth Solomon.
Join us next week on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you, everybody.
Step up, you ought to step out. Rise up, rise up. I know you ought to rise up and